I think we should start. It's already 5 o'clock past
Yes, sir.
five. I think
Yes.
we should start. Okay.
Yeah.
Can I do the welcome?
Sir, I like to introduce you before you start, sir.
Okay, okay, okay.
That I want to do it. It's my honor. Uh, so, hello, everyone. I am Dr. H. Parmesh, the visiting professor at the Diveja Center Climate Change in the Institute of Science, Bangalore. On behalf of the Diveja Center Climate Change and Commonwealth Country Health and Disability, UK India chapter, and Lakeside Education Trust. So I wish you all the best and welcome you to this program. We have this Diabetic Education Week, and which we are going to listen to the expert people, as a matter of fact. And officially, to inaugurate this one, we are going to call Professor J. Srinivasan. Professor J. Srinivasan was the graduate of IIT Madras 1969. He did his MS in State University, New York, PhD Stanford University. He is the founder of the Diveja Center Climate Change and the past chairman since 2009 to 2016. He is the emeritus distinguished professor of the Diveja Climate Change till date. He is the honorary professor, Center for Atmospheric and Oceanic Studies in Institute of Science till date. Lead author of the second and fourth IPCC report on climate change and a reviewer editor of a third report. His major scientific contributions are in the area of monsoon models and climate change. He received Lifetime Achievement Award from the Ministry of Earth Science in 2019. But since I know him for the past 3.5 years, he's a man with values who believed in discipline, simplistic way of life, with helping hand, with academic zeal to propagate the knowledge. And Sir Nobel Law Sir C.V. Raman was his uncle. He come from the renowned educationist. It's a pleasure to have him in the absence of our chairman, Dr. Satish. And over to you, sir. Please have welcome officially.
Thank you, Dr. Paramesh.
Yeah.
On behalf of Professor S.K. Satish, Chairman, Diveja Center Climate Change, I welcome you all to this seminar series organized by Dr. Paramesh every month on the last Thursday of the month. And we are very happy that this time we got the well-known expert in diabetology to talk about diabetes, Dr. Paramesh.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Well, while introducing again, I wish you all good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever you are there. We have got few people from Canada and USA and Australia. I wish you all. And while talking about the Diabetic Week education program, we have with us experts, as a matter of fact, just to highlight about the World Diabetics Day. India is the second highest in the world after China, and one of the 12 adults, or 74 million people, are diabetic as per the International Diabetic Federation. The childhood diabetes, type 1 diabetes, is 5 to 15% in India. Men are more risk for diabetes. Women are more prone for pre-diabetes. Diabetic burden increased by 25% in India during the COVID-19 and show high post-COVID fatigue. COVID-19, in addition to boosted the risk of diabetes progression and its mortality. Our main Union Minister of State, Dr. Jitendra Singh, said on 18th of November 2021, the current challenge our country is facing is to prevent the diabetes in youth and pregnant women. The key risk factors for the diabetes in India is 28% is from the reduced use of the plant-based diet and fiber, fruits and vegetables. 38% is low physical activity. 47% is from the high intake of junk food. The other causes of air pollution, stress, high consumption of alcohol and sugary drinks. And diabetes and climate change, heat wave, extreme cold, and air pollution have an impact on the already fragile health of diabetes mellitus patient with high morbidity and mortality. The heat wave create electrolyte imbalance, exacerbate the chronic kidney diseases that are studied in the African countries. Cold ambient temperature increase the acute myocardial infarction with poor glycemic control, and ambient air pollution, nitrous oxides, suspended particulate 2.5 micron, ozone, carbon dioxide, they increase gestational diabetes, decrease insulin sensitivity, increase adipose tissue deposition, increase beta cell dysfunction. And drinking too much of cow's milk, high intake cow's milk increases the risk of type 1 diabetes in children, and also as a pulmonary, I could say, higher risk of development of asthma. So the people with the diabetes should follow their doctor to monitor monitor the comorbidities affecting the the vital organ. And to talk about this issue, we have none other than Padma Shri Dr. V. Mohan, MD, FRCP from the other states, from London, Edinburgh, Glasgow, and Ireland, PhD in DSc, and various fellowship has got, and chairman of the Chief of Diabetology, chairman of the Mohan Diabetes Specialty Center, and the president and chief of Diabetes Research Madras, Diabetes Research Foundation, Chennai in India. And Dr. Mohan oversees a chain of 50 diabetic centers across the 8 states of India and has over 540,000 registered diabetes patients in his care, in his centers. And Dr. Mohan has published over 1,429 papers in peer-reviewed journals. This includes 915 original articles, 330 review articles. And he has many awards, as a matter of fact. The top two, he is one of the top 2 scientists in the world and the highest ranked scientist in Tamil Nadu by Stanford University, and among the top 0.1% of researchers in the type 2 diabetes by the expert scale from the PubMed. And he got many awards, BC Roy National Award, and by the Indian Medical Council, and B.R. Ambedkar Centenary Award, and Dr. Harold Rifkin, Distinguished International Service Father of Diabetes Award by the American Diabetic Association. And recently he has been confirmed FRS from the Royal Society of Edinburgh. In 2012, Dr. Mohan received the Padma Shri from the government of India. Dr. Mohan's autobiography, Making Excellence a Habit, The Secret of Building a World-Class Healthcare System in India, published Penguin India, and it is a bestseller. And to chair this important topic, we have with us another dignitary. We have with us Dr. Vagish Iyer S. He has an MD, DM, DNB, MNE, MS. He is the professor and former head of Department of Endocrinology, St. John's Medical College and Hospital, Bangalore. He is the president of the Karnataka Endocrine Society for the year 2022, the former vice president, Karnataka Endocrine Society, former treasurer and former secretary, all these chapters. He had many publications in the national, international journals, totaling about 109. He contributed many chapters. He's contributed in the textbook up to number 19 chapters. He has got many orations. Important ones: Sunil Das oration 2016 and Presidential oration 2018. He is a principal investigator and co-investigator for 80 multicentric clinical trials. It's a great honor having with them. First time we have included, as a matter of fact, 2 of the lead discussant, so that we can learn more by asking questions for the experts, as a matter of fact. We have with us Dr. Sudha Tinekar. He is on the website. See, the senior most, we worked together for 3 decades. See, the urban diabetologist, and very fine lady and compassionate. and I am her patient. I am a diabetic for the past 25 years. I'm a patient, my patient. I can vouch for her quality and all the things. In addition to that, we have Dr. Parmesh Shamanna. He's a rural area research worker. I just arrived from 24 hours ago from USA, attending the San Francisco Diabetic Conference. He's here with us. He presented one of his paper. We love to have them, so they make us to learn a little more about it. Having said this one, I'd like to hand over to Professor Vagish to take over, sir. Thank you very much for patient here.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. And thank you, sir, for inviting us and introducing us. I think I don't want to be an obstacle between the excellent lecture which is coming now from Dr. V. Mohan regarding the reversal of a diabetes. I think this is one of the newest coin which has been heard over past 1 decade. A lot of research has been done with some amount of good results, but a lot of confusion is there in whom it's going to be reversed, in whom it's going to be persisted. To throw light on this, we have Dr. V. Mohan. Please, sir.
Thank you. I'll just try to open my. I hope it is seen now.
Yes, sir.
I'll make it full screen. So thank you, everyone. First of all, let me thank Professor Parmesh for the kind invitation, and also Dr. Srinivas for welcoming the gathering today. Dr. Vagesh Iyer, my close friend and colleague, for chairing this session, and the two lead discussants who will also be asking some questions. Let me get on with my presentation first. So the topic of my presentation is reversal of diabetes, myth or reality. And this is the structure of my presentation. First, I'll talk about diabetes in India, some challenges and solutions, and then talk about reversal, when and for whom. So these are the latest figures from the International Diabetes Federation, published only 2 weeks ago. And Dr. Parmesh very correctly mentioned the numbers for India. For some strange reason, 2 years ago, they put the number as 77 million. And now they seem to have reduced the numbers from India from 77 to 74, while doubling the figures for China. I don't know in 2 years how the numbers doubled in China. Anyway, these are the IDF figures, so I won't argue about it. And according to this, India is also supposed to increase to 124 million by 2025. But I think these are all underestimates, and it will be much more. Strangely, Pakistan, which is a country less than 1/3 of our size, is supposed to have half the number of people with diabetes than India. Again, I find that a little strange, because US is much bigger and was in 3rd place until 2 years ago. Suddenly, Pakistan from somewhere 8th position in 2 years has moved to 3rd position. Anyway, these are just some committees which sit down and make these numbers. The problem is that we have enough number of people with diabetes in the world. It's all in millions. So we're talking about, if I used to joke that if diabetes was a country, it will be the 3rd largest country in the world after China and India, because we already have more people with diabetes in the world than the United States itself, population of the United States itself. Now, where do these figures come from? In India, we have the INDIAB study, the ICMR INDIAB study, funded by the Indian Council of Medical Research and the Department of Health Research. And we have had the honor of running this whole study. It took us 10 years to complete it. We had to study every state in India and get a representative sample of that state, and then work out the urban, rural, diabetes, pre-diabetes, and many other things. The sample size of 124,000 individuals, representative of the whole of India. 2017, we published the first 15 states in India. Now we are ready to publish the remaining 15 states, and that's being written up. So when we looked at those results, which we published in Lancet Diabetes, we found that the prevalence of diabetes varied from 4.3% in Bihar to 13.6% in Chandigarh. But note that the data in, for example, Punjab and Tamil Nadu is over 10 years old. So there could have been even a doubling of these figures in 10 years' time. In fact, in the next 15 states, which we did more recently, the prevalence rates in some states like Kerala, Goa, and in Puducherry has now exceeded 20%. So these figures have to be corrected for time. But suffice to say that there is a wide variation in the prevalence rates of diabetes. And this actually correlates with the GDP of the state shown here in blue. So the state with the lowest GDP, Bihar, also had the lowest prevalence rate of diabetes, and the highest GDP was in Chandigarh in those 15 states, and it also had the highest prevalence of diabetes. So showing that we are actually paying a price for development, because obesity comes with it, physical inactivity comes with it, and some of the risk factors which Dr. Paramesh mentioned are probably contributing to this increase. Now in India itself, we know that the so-called Asian Indian phenotype makes us more prone to both diabetes and cardiovascular disease. This includes some peculiarities of the Asian Indians, which includes lower age at onset of type 2 diabetes. We don't have to be very obese to get diabetes in India. We initially start off with high insulin levels during pre-diabetes, but then there's a rapid decline in beta cell function. This number 5 is very important because you have a characteristic dyslipidemia. Some of you may or may not know that we have the lowest HDL cholesterol, or the good cholesterol, in the whole world among all ethnic groups, including high triglycerides and small dense LDL. So it goes on and on. A good friend, Dr. Yajnik from Pune, showed that even newborn children in Pune, who are much smaller, who weighed much less, birth weight was less, had more fat, and they had more leptin and more insulin compared to their bigger babies who were born in the UK and Southampton. So there are many characteristics, and whether it's in utero or from birth or due to our high carbohydrate diet, probably a combination of all of these. More worrisome than that is the fact that we have a huge burden due to diabetes complications. So if you see coronary artery disease, peripheral vascular disease, these two are the macrovascular complications, big vessels. Then the small vessels affecting the eye, the kidney, and the nerves. And these are the urban figures, and these are rural figures. All these are epidemiological figures, not hospital-based. So you can see shown here below the millions of people who are affected due to each of these complications. We just take kidney disease, 20 million people having diabetic kidney disease, which is almost the population of Australia. Of course, it includes microalbuminuria upwards. So it's a very large burden due to diabetic complications. And it's just to prevent this that we are talking about good control of diabetes and possibly reversal as well. So the question is, can we start prevention earlier in the natural history of diabetes? I know that not all of you are medical doctors, and therefore I thought it's worth reminding ourselves about the natural history of diabetes, which goes from the stage of normal glucose tolerance, which is when we are born, we have normal glucose tolerance. Then we move to a stage of pre-diabetes, and there are two types of pre-diabetes there. One where the fasting alone is elevated, and the second where the 2-hour value is elevated, and we'll come back to that later. So these two, it's called IFG and IGT, both comprise pre-diabetes. And of course, you can have IFG plus IGT also, the pre-diabetic stage. And then you move to the stage of clinical diabetes. And finally, if you don't control diabetes, you can enter the stage of complications, which I showed you in the earlier stage. And so usually diabetes is thought to move from left to right. But now we have started talking about diabetes moving from right to left also. But remember that this blue arrow, which is shown here, shows that from pre-diabetes, you can develop normal glucose tolerance. From clinical diabetes, you can go to pre-diabetes. Once you reach there, you can also go to normal glucose tolerance. And we'll talk about this in the second part of my talk. But what about preventing pre-diabetes going into clinical diabetes? Is that also possible? Certainly it is. One more point here before I leave the slide is that once you enter the stage of complications, there is no reversal, because people think that even if your kidney is affected or eye is affected, you can still reverse diabetes. Remember that when end organ failure has already occurred or damage has already occurred, then you're beyond the point of reversal of diabetes. The best you can do is to slow it down and not enter into the end stage of those complications. Now, to show you data that diabetes is preventable, there are many randomized clinical trials, and the Diabetes Prevention Program, the DPP in the US, is the best. There's also a Finnish study and a Daching study from China. There's also an Indian DPP program, which was done in Chennai by my brother-in-law and other colleagues. This is another study which we did. It's called as the DCLIP study. DCLIP stands for Diabetes Community Lifestyle Improvement Program. And Dr. Venkat Narayan, my good colleague, who's also a product of St. John's, now the head of the Rollins School of Public Health at Emory University, and I were the PIs for this. And the study was mainly led by Ranjini Harish from our group and Dr. Mary Beth Weber and Lisa Steme from Emory University. Both these girls, meanwhile, by the way, did their PhD using the data from the DCLIP study, which was done in Chennai. And what we did was we took 600 participants with pre-diabetes who were screened from the community. And then one control group we had where they only received standard advice and they did not take any steps to prevent diabetes. The intervention group, we provided them 24 lifestyle classes focusing on increasing physical activity for weight loss and diabetes prevention. And just to tell you the results in a nutshell, which is published in Diabetes Care, we found that if the pre-diabetes included IGT, that is a 2-hour value being elevated, then there was a very good reduction in the incidence of new onset diabetes, 31% if it is IGT alone, and 36% reduction. That means 36% of people were prevented from developing diabetes compared to the control group if they had IFG and IGT. But those who had only the isolated increase in fasting, the IIFG we call it, isolated impaired fasting glucose, there was only a 12% reduction in the progression to diabetes. And this is despite diet, exercise, classes, structured classes, as well as metformin in those who could not prevent the progression to diabetes. We used metformin, and despite that, people progressed to diabetes. So just to tell you how difficult it is to prevent the progression to diabetes. These are physical classes where people came, 24 classes were done. People were taught diet, exercise, and everything, and still it was difficult. So what we concluded was that stepwise prevention of diabetes in people with pre-diabetes can effectively reduce diabetes incidence in third, but this is mostly in the IGT group. And people with IFG, they require different intervention. We're trying to find out what that intervention is. Now, can this be scaled up to the community is the next question. And I'll show you 2 examples from Chennai and Tamil Nadu. The first was what is called as the Asiad Colony project. This is from our first epidemiological study, started in 1998 or so in the 1990s, actually, where we did what's called as the CUP study, the Chennai Urban Population Study. We took basically a middle income group in Tirumangalam, which is the Asiad Colony, and the low income group, which is a slum, a Bharati Nagar slum in T Nagar. About 800 people in this arm and 500 people in that arm. And they were only 5 miles apart. And what the question we asked is the diabetes different in these 2 colonies? Believe it or not, there was no data within a city looking at a middle income group and a low income group. The hypothesis was that the middle income group will have a higher prevalence of diabetes because they have cars, the physical activity is less, their body mass index is probably higher, they weighed more, they probably ate more calories and so on as compared to this group. And therefore, the results were not very surprising, although they didn't get into an international journal because there's no data at that time. And so we found that in the middle income group, the prevalence was 12.4% and about half in the low income group, because they were much thinner and had all the less diabetogenic factors compared to the middle income group. Now, at this stage, we went back to them, to this Asiad colony, and told them that unless you do something, your diabetes rates are going to go up. So they said, what should we do? They said, let's start with physical activity. Why don't you do physical activity? And they said there is no place to walk. So as we were talking to them, we found this place, which was a vacant piece of land next to their Asiad colony. So we said, what is this thing kept for? And they said, well, we're going to build the next block of Asiad colony there. So we said, why don't you, instead of building the next block of Asiad colony there, why don't you ask the government to build a park there? So they went to the government. The government said, we have no money. We have got too many projects and so on. So then we went back to them and said, why don't you create history by building a park yourself? why do you need the government to build a park? We can raise funds and we can build a park. So it came about that probably for the first time in India at that time, 25, 30 years ago, we help these people to raise money and with that build a beautiful park which is built by them with government permission and maintained by them. Until today, it remains one of the best maintained parks because it is done by the people for the people. So this became a kind of I'm sure for climate change, this will be a very interesting thing for you, how the greenery is there and how children are now able to play here instead of going to computer games and video games and so on. So here you can see that we went on following this colony. We're still following them up. And initially 13.8% of people were exercising in the colony before the park was built. After the park was built, 52.1% of people in that colony started exercising. So this was a tremendous jump, a 277% increase in exercise. This caught the attention of the WHO, who started talking about this and saying how empowerment of people can help to prevent diabetes and obesity. In fact, this started a chain of parks, and the second one came up in Chennai and the third one came up in Chennai. By the time elections were coming and the government realized that this is what people want, so they said, oh, you all can only build 1 or 2 at a time. We are going to build 100 parks for you. And then they repaired another 100 parks. So this colony, the first, the residential park which is built by people, ultimately resulted in over 200 parks in Chennai. So you can see how even in respect to climate change, we're trying to make change, green cover and so on. If you start a project, somehow the good things tend to get scaled up. But then let me get back to diabetes. The whole idea here was not for climate change, but it was for diabetes prevention. So we had told the people in Asiad Colony, this was around the time when we went to them. I told you around 12% was the prevalence in Chennai, and that was the prevalence then. So we said, if you don't watch out, diabetes rates will go up, we had told them. And indeed it did. Today in the cities, this is 2014 CARS data, this is funded by the NIH. This is done in both Chennai and in Delhi, again with Dr. Venkat Narayan as a collaborator from Emory. Today, the rates of diabetes is over 25% in the cities. What used to be 12% has now become 25%. So we were interested to know, somewhere around this time, we went back around 2008 or so, we went back. By the time in Chennai, it was about 18%. From 12%, it had gone to 18, 19%. And in the colonies near the Asiad colony, it had already gone to 20%, 22%. Remember, they are the middle income group. So we said, okay, let's now go back to the Asiad colony and see what happened there. You remember the earlier figure was 12%. So we said, okay, now about 10 years later, what has happened to the prevalence in Asiad colony? We did not expect it to go down for the simple reason that we are examining the same people and now they are 10 years older. And age is a non-modifiable risk factor for diabetes. And that's the reason why when you come to reversal also, I'll tell you that with age itself, people will get diabetes. And you can't reverse aging now. It's not at least possible to a large extent even now. So we were expecting that there would be a slight increase in the prevalence rate because they've been taking some measures to prevent diabetes by exercising and so on. We were therefore quite happy when we found that the prevalence rate was only 15.4 compared to 22, 23% in the colonies nearby, showing that this had probably slowed down. The exercise that they were doing and our intervention had helped to reduce the rate of growth of diabetes. I won't say it prevented or reduced, but the rate of growth had been slowed down due to this colony. And we are very happy about it. But then came the shocker. The shocker was in the low income group. Now, remember, they had only 6.5%. We tried to do some prevention there, but the people are not interested in 1990s to talk about a 2000, it's got published the paper. So they were not interested in diabetes because they had so many other problems. They're slum dwellers. They had, infection, they had cholera, they had typhoid, they had TB, they had alcoholism, drug abuse, there are all kinds of other problems there. And so they were least interested in diabetes, okay? So, but anyway, we said, okay, having finished this, now let's go back to the low income group. We thought probably about 8% or 9% it would have marginally gone up there. Like this, it went up. That also would have probably gone up. We were shocked to find that it had shot up from 6.5% to 15%. Okay, that's a 135% increase. So we published this in the American journal JDST, Journal of Diabetes and Technology, and the title of the paper was Convergence of Prevalence Rates of Diabetes in the Middle Income and the Low Income Group in Chennai. And we explained that this is a natural increase from 6.5 to 15%, but this was a slowed down increase because of intervention. And we had not made the intervention probably gone to 23% as in the rest of Chennai. It's very difficult to convince the reviewers because it's a real life experiment. It's not an RCT like the DCLIP study that we did. But still, it stands to reason because their BMI had also not gone up very much. There's so many other indicators to show that this is indeed the effect of the intervention. So this is an example of translational research done through community empowerment. Just by motivating the community and empowering them, they were able to reduce their own diabetes. And again, the WHO was very excited when they saw these results because the community is now taking the effort to prevent diabetes. At that stage, we said, what about rural India? Now, these figures could have changed now, but roughly about a quarter of the people live in urban India, and about 72% of the population lives in rural India. The urbanization is increasing, of course. This is about 10-year-old data. The problem is that 75% of the doctors practice in urban areas. So it's a complete mismatch. Doctors in urban areas with population living in rural areas. And we have poverty, lack of awareness, lack of access, lack of specialized diabetes care, a lot of challenges in rural India. So we said, can we make the 6A test possible in rural India? What is the 6A test? Make diabetes care available, accessible, affordable, appropriate, acceptable, and accountable in rural India. Now, we didn't have a model. There was no model either in India or in the world for us to adopt. So we had to completely innovate and find our own model. And this model is called as a Chunampet model for rural diabetes care. Why Chunampet? Because Chunampet is a small village in Kanchipuram district. For those of you who know Chennai, you know that the next district to Chennai is called Kanchipuram district. And at the southern tip of that is a village called Chunampet. Now, how did we go to Chunampet? There was a very wealthy but also philanthropic person, the zamindar of that village. Unfortunately, he died recently after he reached almost 90 years of age. But at that time, he was a bachelor, and therefore he was giving away his land for good purposes. He had heard about us, and he called for me, and he said, can you come to Chunampet? I didn't even know where Chunampet was. So I went to see him, and he said, I want to give you a few acres of land as a donation, but if you can tell me what you'll do with that land. So I worked out the model, the Chunampet model, and told him that this is what we're planning to do, to reach out not just to Chunampet, but to a lot of villages in and around, about 40 villages in and around, and for diabetes prevention. And he liked the idea. So he gave us the land. We went to the World Diabetes Foundation, who gave us the van. We came to Bangalore to Indian Space Research Organization. They gave us the satellite, and we constructed from scratch. We bought the chassis and we constructed what we call as the rural diabetes model, or the rural diabetes hospital. Inside, of course, this is the satellite given by ISRO, and inside you have all the equipments, Dopplers, bathymetry. You have a place for people to lie down. You have fundus camera inside. You have video conferencing equipment, VSAT dish, everything that you can think of needed in a modern diabetes hospital, we put into this van. And then I'll show you a small video of people. Our team then goes to visit all these villages. We take young men and women from these villages, teach them how to do heights, weights, blood pressures, blood sugars, after obtaining informed consents. And then if somebody turns out, the whole population is screening, and if they turn out to have diabetes, our van is just next door, and they can enter into the van and get all their checkup done, their feet, their heart, kidney, eyes, everything checked up. Here is foot being checked, and here we are checking for cataract and for diabetic retinopathy. The technician takes a picture of the retina, which is immediately zoomed back to our hospital. And here is our senior ophthalmologist, Dr. Pratibha, sitting in Chennai, talking to this lady 150, 200 kilometers away, telling her what is diabetes, what is diabetic retinopathy, why we are checking for it. In the land that the Zamindar gave us, we built, my wife and I donated the money for a building. And there we built the Sai Rural Diabetes Center. The person you saw just now, he is Dr. Rakesh, who has been for the last several years running this. He's from that place. We took him, trained him, and then he runs the diabetes services there every day, 6 days a week. The results were fabulous. And what happened was in these 42 villages, we went beyond the 42 villages, and then we gave the awareness to 200,000 people. In the 42 villages, the population of total population is 50,000, of which adult population 27,000. We screened everyone for diabetes with a response rate of almost 90%. And then we screened everyone for complications. That's how we got the rural data, by the way. So we had an 88% response rate. And then using very low cost tablets, both generic metformin and sulfonylureas, we brought down within the first year the A1C of the entire population. We were able to bring down from 9.3 to 8.5%. This is the first rural model, and therefore it received a lot of attention. I don't know whether I have the slides. Yeah. So the Lancet talked about this, and they wrote on India. They'd written about universal healthcare, and in the main Lancet, it was written that the Chunampet Rural Diabetes Project thus seems to be a good model for delivering preventive and therapeutic diabetes healthcare to rural areas. This was in 2011 when the Lancet published a series of 5 articles on India healthcare. And then, of course, a lot of attention from CNN, Discovery Channel. 8 times they showed, came to Chunampet and made a program there. It was aired 8 times. And then the Le Monde in France, BBC, Jugaad, the Indian book, where Ratan Tata has written a foreword and so on, has a chapter on this, on the Chunampet model. And then even business magazines wrote about it, although they said it's a loss-making thing. Obviously, it's loss-making. It's completely free. But they also wrote about it. So this project received a lot of attention, and very many similar projects were adopted across India and in different parts of the world. Now let me move on. So this is about the challenges and some of the solutions, including prevention of diabetes and prevention of its complications. I'm happy to tell you that today we have hundreds of people who have completed 90 years of age with diabetes. Some have lived up to 100 years and beyond. I have 4 people who have crossed 100 years of age after living for diabetes for 60 or more years, some for 70 years, and they're doing well without any complication. They've been taking treatment all along. None of them had reversal of diabetes, and yet they have lived their full span of life for 100 years. But now let's come to reversal of diabetes, when and for whom. This drawing, this figure I already showed you, that if you're moving from clinical diabetes to pre-diabetes or to normal glucose tolerance, that is called as reversal of diabetes. In other words, going from right to left. So traditionally, diabetes is considered progressive, increasing number of oral drugs. 50% of people require insulin within 5 years. And therefore, we always said it's treatable, but not curable or reversible. There are 5 situations where reversal of diabetes is possible. After severe weight loss, and I'll be talking only about this in the rest of my presentation, but after gestational diabetes, after you get diabetes in pregnancy, immediately after the lady delivers, it goes away. So that's an example of reversal, although it can come back after the lady, after 4 or 5 years, almost 50 to 70% get diabetes again. After bariatric surgery, if you do bariatric surgery early enough, we have a series of bariatric surgery which are published. We find that in the first 8 years duration of diabetes, you can reverse the diabetes. After that, it's not reversible. Even after they lose 40 kilos, 50 kilos in weight, the number of medicines may come down. The HbA1c will come down. The weight will come down by even 40, 50 kilos. But the A1C does not become normal even after bariatric surgery in those who are treated late. Most of the patients we operated late because as the last resort only we do bariatric surgery. Stress-induced diabetes. Any acute stress can produce diabetes. If stress goes away, diabetes can completely reverse. And we have a series like that. Drug-induced diabetes is very common. Many of you would have heard of steroid-induced diabetes during COVID. And during severe COVID, steroid is used to save lives. So steroids can produce diabetes. And if you stop the steroid, of course, it can go away. But then again, it can come back after a few years. All these are actually relapses of diabetes can occur after all of these. But for the rest of my presentation, I'll just talk about severe weight loss in the interest of time. Now, what is remission or reversal of diabetes? In fact, the term reversal of diabetes itself is frowned upon by the American Diabetic Association. They say you should not even use the word reversal. You should use the word remission. What is the difference between remission and reversal? Reversal implies that diabetes is gone forever. People imagine that after that they can eat gulab jamun, they can put on weight, they can do whatever. It's like a panacea, you're completely cured. A magic wand has come and reversed your diabetes. That is really not true. What you have done is you only moved from diabetes to pre-diabetes, pre-diabetes. If you remember that figure, you can always go back to another state. So the American Diabetes Association says we use the word remission in cancer. Somebody's got cancer, you treat it, then there is no cancer now. You do PET scan. For 5 years, it is not there, and you say they are in remission. But that doesn't mean that the cancer will not come back. Almost invariably, the cancer comes back. And so when it comes back, it's a metastasis. And therefore, it comes back with a vengeance, as they say. Okay. So ADA says that if the HbA1c is less than 6.5, fasting less than 126 without any medicines for 3 months, it is remission. But other trials say 3 months is too short. It should be at least 1 year before you say it is remission. Now, how do you achieve this? There are two ways in which you can achieve it. Both of them require weight reduction. Without weight reduction, it's almost impossible to get remission. But there are the two popular diets which I used are a low carbohydrate diet and a very low calorie diet. Now, in the calorie diet, you're not talking about carbohydrate protein at all. Your only concern is to give less than 800 calories per day. Okay. So if you give less than 800 calories per day, people will lose weight. In the low carbohydrate group, which they use, they bring down the carbohydrate content. Anything above 45% carbohydrate is considered as high carbohydrate. In India, we take 60, 70% carbohydrate or more, 75% carbohydrate, which is far too high. If you can bring it down, it becomes moderate and then low, and then very low carbohydrate is less than 10% carbohydrate or 20 to 50 grams per day. This is what the believers of the low carbohydrate diet do. They reduce the carbohydrate to less than 10%. Now, is it sustainable? That's a question. If you bring down somebody's carbohydrate to 50 grams per day, 20 to 50 grams per day, it means virtually there is no dosa, no idli, no chapati, no puri, no bread, no this, not even pulses, because even that contains carbohydrate. Fruits you can't take, that contains carbohydrate. Even some of the vegetables contain carbohydrate. So to maintain this, you have to be on some liquid formula, which you'll have to take for the rest of your life. So you can imagine people drop out after some time. Very low calorie diets also suffer from that, because you have an 800 calorie diet and then you produce this remission. How long can you continue on that very low? It's practically starvation diet. For the rest of your life, you have to starve. Okay, that is how they used to treat diabetes before insulin was discovered, the famous Allen starvation diet. So virtually, we are going back to that and expecting people to be on that lifelong. Okay, now how does these things work? When you have a positive calorie balance, what happens is that you develop insulin resistance and liver fat increases. This gets deposited in the fat, producing resistance to insulin. You know that in type 2 diabetes, there are two defects. One is insulin resistance. The other is insulin secretory defect. Insulin is not secreted. The excess fat then moves as triglyceride and goes to the pancreas and gets deposited there. So there's excess fat in the pancreas, and therefore insulin secretion also comes down. So insulin secretion goes down, insulin resistance also occurs, and both of these produce diabetes. What if you do the reverse? If you develop a negative calorie balance, liver fat will go, so insulin resistance improves, insulin sensitivity improves, and then if your pancreatic fat goes, then your insulin secretion also improves. So can it be reversed by very low calorie diets? There are a lot of papers which show that, but I'm just showing you one or two. Within 7 days of instituting a substantial negative calorie balance, if you cut from 1,600, 1,400, it's not going to happen. But you bring it to below 1,000, say 800 calories, then the fasting glucose can reduce, and after bariatric surgery, the very next day it will happen. And then the liver fat comes down, liver sensitivity improves, and after 8 weeks, so this is 1 week, after 8 weeks, the pancreatic fat also comes down. As shown here, you can see the fasting glucose dropping within the first 1 week itself, hepatic glucose production coming down, hepatic fat coming down. And you can see the liver fat both in diabetics and in non-diabetic people after bariatric surgery. You can see substantial reduction in the liver fat. And this is after 8 weeks in the pancreas now. You can see the pancreatic fat coming down and the insulin secretion improving. So both the defects can be corrected by about 8 weeks time by very low calorie diets. And did you know that type 2 diabetes is caused by less than 1 gram of fat in the pancreas? But to get rid of that 1 gram of fat, you need to lose 15 kilograms in weight. And the best evidence for this, although there are a lot of trials, the best evidence from which all the remission trial started, or the reversal trial started, is called as a DIRECT trial. DIRECT stands for Diabetes Remission Clinical Trial. This was done by Roy Taylor and group in Newcastle and published in, that's Roy Taylor, and published in the Lancet. This is also the largest study published, where about 300 people were taken, the proper randomized clinical trial, and about 300 people, about half in the intervention arm, half in the control arm. The intervention arm received about 800 calorie diet for 3 to 5 months. It's a liquid formula diet which was given for 3 to 5 months. And what are the results? The results showed that diabetes remission was achieved in 46%. Now remember, this is under strict randomized clinical trial conditions. These are short-term type 2 diabetic patients with very short duration, highly motivated people with a dietitian or an educator following them up regularly with regular sessions which were given to them. And with that, they were able to get in less than half of the participants in the intervention group and 4% in the control group. So minus the control group, 42% of the participants received remission. Okay. Now this was related to weight loss, which is shown here. Now, if you take all the participants in the intervention arm, some of them lost less than 5 kilos in spite of going on this very low calorie diet for months together. Some lost less than 5 kilos. There's virtually no remission in them. If they lost 10 kilos, a few started getting into remission. As you reach 10 to 15 kilos, more people achieved remission. When you lost more than 15 kilos in weight, and remember there's only a subset of the people who achieved this. In them, 86% achieved remission. So if you want to set it correctly, the facts correctly, 14% did not achieve remission even after losing 15 kilos in the intervention arm in this trial mode, in a RCT kind of a mode. And note that even among those who lost 15 kilos in weight, out of this 86%, by the end of the second year, this is the first year and this is the second year. By the end of the second year, while being on the trial, 16% reverted back to diabetes. In other words, a relapse of their diabetes. So the percentage has already come down to 70%. And then we don't have data beyond 2 years, but I suspect it will start coming down with time. So these are the conclusions of the best remission study ever done in the world, which is quoted all over today, that half of the people who had short duration of diabetes, less than 6 years duration, who had lost 10 kg weight loss, achieved diabetes remission with some improvement in the beta cell function as well. The practice points that I would like to emphasize here, that it really doesn't matter whether you use a low calorie diet or a very low calorie diet or a low carbohydrate diet. Different studies have used different diets and they've all found to be effective. So it is not a particular diet that you take, but it's essentially lowering the calories. And if you don't lower the calories and don't lower the carbs, you're not going to achieve remission. But they only work for a targeted population and you have to get severe weight loss. But the problem is in the maintenance of this. Who does reversal work for? Does it work for everyone? First of all, remember that type 1 diabetes is not reversible. I've seen people tell children that they can reverse their type 1 diabetes. I hope they stop playing with these children, because we've already had some very bad experiences with children trying these kind of reversal programs and so on. They can die. So I think we should leave children alone and don't get into, for type 1 diabetes, don't try anything else. Just continue the insulin for the time being. Type 2 diabetes, does it work for everyone? I have devised this, what I call as the ABCDE mantra. These are the people who will respond among type 2 diabetes. A stands for A1C. If your A1C is not very high, for example, you have 8 or 9 A1C, they took only such people in the DIRECT trial who had mild diabetes, short duration, and they had good C-peptide. These are people they took in the DIRECT trial. They are the people where half of them were able to get remission, even in that group. So this is a targeted population. A1C not very high. Body weight must be high because we have to lose 15 kilos. If your ideal body weight is 60 kilos, people who are 50 kilos ask me, can I reverse my diabetes? They are on insulin, type 2, taking large number of tablets. Can I reverse my diabetes? What are they going to lose to reverse their diabetes? Stop, become 0 kilos in weight? I mean, it's difficult. If you have a lot of weight to lose, it's easier to reverse. C-peptide has to be good. Unless your insulin secretion is good, how can you reverse if there is no insulin secretion at all? D is duration of diabetes. Those in this direct trial, they took 6 years. I think about 6 to 8 years. From our bariatric surgery results, we know that up to 8 years reversal is possible. After that, it gets increasingly difficult. I'm not saying it's not possible, but it's very, very small percentage of people after 10, 15, 20 years can reverse their diabetes, very small percentage of people. And lastly, you have to be highly enthusiastic and motivated because you have to continue this for a long time. And unless you do that, you will drop out. And once you drop out, everything will go back. And remember that effectiveness beyond 2 years, as of now, has not been shown. If we do not have enough data on proper randomized clinical trials done in diverse ethnic populations like Indians, where I told you Asian Indian phenotype is a little different. We also have the fastest progression from pre-diabetes to diabetes. In separate papers, you've shown all that. And finally, re-reversal of diabetes, what is also called as relapse of diabetes, occurs in a large percentage of people. What is this diabetes re-reversal? This is a term which I have coined to show what happens to people. Let me illustrate this with a case study. This is a 35-year-old gentleman who had diabetes of 6 years duration. He was treated with tablets and insulin because sugars are very high. He was then put on a low calorie, including a low carbohydrate diet was given. He lost a lot of weight and was very happy that he achieved reversal of diabetes. He was able to stop all his medicines, insulin, tablets, everything, and still maintain remission of diabetes. So we're very happy for him. Look at his weight. It came down. See, in this particular time, he took a lot of time to bring it down. It's not that in 2 months he achieved it. He had a weight of 123. He slowly brought it down to 118, 116, 102. And in about 2.5 years, he had come down to 99. His target was below 100. He said, I will bring it below 100. So when he came to 99, after losing 24 kilos, he actually achieved reversal or remission of diabetes. His HbA1c initially itself was only 8.4. This is what I said, is a milder people who are able to reverse. If he had 14, 15, it would have been difficult for him to reverse. But here he has brought it down, 7.7, 7.7, then a big jump drop to 5.6 and 5.4. And this is without any medicine. So 5.4 is like a normal HbA1c. So again, we can say reversal has achieved. Look at his fasting blood sugar. 132 has come down to 89. And postprandial from 293 has come down to 110. So 89 and 110 without medicines with HbA1c of 5.4 is obviously remission. His liver function improved. I told you the liver fat comes down. A measure of that is the SGOT and SGPT. You can see the SGOT came down from 61 to 16 and the SGPT came down from 94 to 20. So again, these are normal values. His liver fat, when we measured by ultrasound, had gone. Grade 2 fatty liver has become 0. Perfect, absolutely perfect. Now this is where the problem starts. What happens after that? Okay, so he stopped all his medicines and he forgot about his diabetes. He told everyone he was cured. We kept calling him and saying, I know you're cured, or I know you're in remission. You don't use the word cure. Why don't you come for follow-up? Because I think it's important to see diabetes does have a natural history. You're going to get older. You're going to get things. So he wouldn't, listen to us. He said, my diabetes is reversed. Why should I don't need a diabetologist now, and so on. 9 months later, he gave a ring and he said, I want to see you. I said, what happened? He said, no, I think my sugars are going up. So he came. When he came, what is this? It's, okay, so that's what happened to him. His weight had come down, as I told you, to 99. 9 months later, his weight has increased to 112. Now, if you do the maths, he lost 24 kilos. Now he has gained only 13. So he has only gained half of it. So what would you expect? His HbA1c has gone from 5.4 to 6, maybe 6.2, maybe still under remission. That's what one would expect. Remember, during that time, he has told himself that he is cured. So he has not followed any diet. He stopped everything because he's been going around everywhere, internet, this, that, social media, saying like before, after pictures, showing everything, saying I'm cured, I'm cured, I'm cured, I'm cured. He has psyched himself to saying that he's cured of diabetes. When he saw his HbA1c from 5.4, it didn't go to 6, it went to 9.6. That was much higher than his original result. Just like I told you, cancer comes back with a vengeance. Diabetes comes back with a vengeance. And I have seen this occur again and again and again in my patients who have attempted this, and then bang, it goes so high. Look at what happened to his sugars. His fasting sugar from 89 became 247, almost like his postprandial sugar. His postprandial sugar went to 321. These were his worst sugars in his life. He had never achieved that, those kind of things. Okay. Look at his liver function test. From 16, it went to 66. And from SGPT, went from 20 to 152. We did the ultrasound. Grade 3 fatty liver has come. In 9 months, this fat, which had completely gone, has completely reaccumulated back, and he has developed grade 3 fatty liver. And so much of liver dysfunction, all occurring within 9 months' time. So very rapidly, you can lose as well as go up. I would also say that this is very bad for the body, because here already it's at a high level of inflammatory stress and so on. Then through a very, very strenuous process, he has brought it down all here. So the body is now completely changed to another milieu. And now again, back to another milieu, all occurring within 2-3 years. The fat is going up and down, going in and out, sugars are going in and out, HbA1c is going in and out, weight is going up and down. The whole body is like being shaken from one extreme to another extreme. Even if he had stayed there at 94 and 61, it might have been okay. But this, what he has done, has really resulted, the man is becoming quite sick because of all the things that he has done. So this is an example of re-reversal of diabetes. And I've seen hundreds of such patients with re-reversal of their diabetes. They try various things and then come back with a re-reversal. So my take-home message is, I'm going to stop here by saying that the prevalence of diabetes is increasing rapidly in India. Asian Indian phenotypes contributes to diabetes and CVD risk. Through community empowerment, both diabetes and CVD can be prevented. And in many of my patients, 50-year, 60-year survival has been reported. People have lived beyond 90 and even 100 years of age in perfectly good health with no complications, still continuing their medications with no problem whatsoever. And then reversal of diabetes, of course, is possible in a subset of people with type 2 diabetes, but re-reversal or relapse of diabetes is common. And of course, we should try to reverse it in the people. We should talk to them about it and tell them that reversal is possible. But the whole trick is to keep them engaged after that, because otherwise they completely relapse their diabetes, because that's what they've been waiting for. And with that, I'll stop presenting. And if there are any questions, I'll be happy to take. Over to Dr. Vagesh Iyer.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. It was a treat listening to your talk. I think I have listened to you so many times. It's every time there will be a new message we'll be getting from your talk. So also true with this talk. I invite my other co-panelists, Dr. Sudha Tinaikar and Dr. Parmesh Amana, to join. So I think to start the question and answer session, I think very strong message was started. I think lifestyle is a very important. Reversal is a possible, but it's a temporary, and a re-reversible is a definitive phenomenon. So I think these are the 4 strong messages which came out of your talk. I think we'll be taking questions on that. See, one of the most important dietary pattern we have is mainly a chronobiology of our eating. Our eating habits are not as ideal as supposedly. Will you just throw light on that?
Yeah, so I think that's a whole new subject by itself, the subject of chronobiology. And it's not just for diabetes, but for health, for obesity, for hypertension, for heart disease, and I believe even for some cancers. So the thing is that we have shifted our lifestyle in such a way that we don't eat on time, we eat late, we sleep late, and the time when God wanted us to sleep, say after 10 o'clock or so, when we are supposed to go to bed, that's why it becomes dark and we're supposed to go to bed. People are watching TV and playing computer games and playing, watching their, playing with their phones, and and so on. And then some of them, of course, is due to their night shifts and so on. They can't avoid it. And so their complete sleep pattern gets completely, and there are whole books written on this, how that can affect every aspect of your metabolism and definitely leads to obesity. And the endocrinology is completely affected. So I think apart from everything else, I didn't mention, for example, yoga. I didn't mention pranayama. I didn't mention meditation. I didn't mention going to bed on time. I didn't talk about healthy eating with enough fruits and vegetables. These are all the healthy principles of not only diabetes but good health. So chronobiology, I think, is very important. Keeping on time, getting up on time, trying to maintain that also, because the body will be expecting. Suppose you're going to bed for 1 month at 10:30 in the night. The next day at 10:30, the body is ready to go to sleep. That time you confuse it by going to bed at 1 o'clock. Next day, the body doesn't know what to expect. So then it gets confused. And then throughout, you keep changing this pattern, then your whole physiology can get affected.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think my friend Dr. Parmesh Shamana is one of the very, very proponents of the weight loss and the reversal. Can you throw light on this, Dr. Parmesh? I think you yourself one of the examples for that. I think I have seen you 5 years back, and now there is a huge change in your BMI. Can you throw light with a personal experience and also on your patients?
Yes, sir. One thing after the direct trial, it has always been emphasized that weight loss can lead to remission and reversal, which is a debatable topic. The reason why I think so is if you look at the direct trial results, all the glycemic improvements and also the pathophysiological changes reversal happened in the early weeks of 8 weeks time, much before they lost the 10 or 15 kg of weight loss. So we need to really think, is this a parallel change which is happening, or is it a serial effect of the weight loss which is causing the diabetes reversal? I think that still needs to be debated and discussed. So it is not true, because if you see some anti-obesity drugs, they can cause weight loss of 10 kgs, but they never cause remission of diabetes. Similarly, Weight Watchers program in type 2 diabetes trial showed a weight loss of 10 kgs, but no remission of diabetes. In fact, their A1C reduced only by 0.4%. So I have a reservation on this concept that weight loss is leading to remission of diabetes, because in the RCT that we are doing in the last 1 year with 300 patients, we have seen patients who lost hardly 3 to 2 kgs of weight coming into remission, and that too with very high A1C. The second thing which I also wanted to ask Dr. Mohan sir was, when we talk of the direct trial and we look at the re-reversal which Dr. Mohan very clearly showed in his patient, we always see that even bariatric surgery, which is now called metabolic surgery, comes with relapses.
Yeah.
And when it comes with relapses again, we always advise patients who undergo bariatric surgery to follow certain lifestyle after bariatric surgery also. The same is true for the medical reversal of diabetes also. Nobody says you can go and eat whatever you want and then you will be free of diabetes. So because there is relapses, we should not stop attempting to reverse diabetes. That is my question to Dr. Mohan. Sir, would we still think that there's a lot of studies required because these are hardly few trials in the world to talk about reversal of diabetes.
Yeah. Maybe I'll respond to these and then the next question. There's a lot of questions loaded within this. So first, let's take bariatric surgery. Now, with bariatric surgery, let's say somebody is 140 kilos in weight. The remission of diabetes occurs on day 1. So the surgery is done. He's not lost even 100 grams. And by the time already reversal has occurred. So in that particular scenario, it's a little different from the others in the sense that the stomach has been cut, the intestines have been thin, bypass has been done, there are a number of hormones in that part, some of which are supposed to be anti-insulin and so on. By diverting it and bypassing it, straight away you remove the offending agent. So that is not related to weight loss at all. The real weight loss starts after 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year later only. The weight loss is progressive after bariatric surgery. Now, we do bariatric surgery as a last resort because we believe that it's a very morbid procedure. We also lost 1 or 2 patients after doing bariatric surgery with the best surgeon. So, for me, it's a last resort. Therefore, somebody who's pre-diabetic, who's 80 kilos in weight, I won't ask to go for bariatric surgery. I think there are much better things to do. Suppose one of those people dies, I will feel guilty for the rest of my life. Having said that, the bariatric surgery, when we did it were not responding to insulin, taking 100 units of insulin, 4 tablets they are taking, and all that. After the bariatric surgery, what happened was, in majority of cases, the insulin dose came down, and they might have come from 3 injections to 1 injection, or instead of 4 tablets, now 1 tablet or 2 tablets. That was what we found in more than 50-60% of our patients. Many of them lost 30-40 kilos in weight. Even after 40 kilo weight loss, I'm not able to get remission. So then we measured peptide, and what we found was, in the early stages, those whom we were operating for the first 8.6 years, that was the exact ROC curve constructed. Up to 8.6 years, they were able to go into remission. Of those who went into remission, after 2 years, they were back. Again, after the diabetes went away, they had stopped all medicines. Their A1C is all completely normal. The bariatric surgery is still in place. They have not done anything to the surgery, but the diabetes is coming back because it is a progressive condition. So whatever you reverse, again it seems to be coming back. But having said that, to be fair, there are a set of people who are highly motivated people. That's why the that enthusiasm part I brought there, because it depends on the individual. So if it is somebody who's highly motivated, whether it's bariatric surgery or no bariatric surgery, they will do it because it's in their mind. So once they have decided to do it, they will do it. Whatever method that they're following, they will do it. So that 5% of people are there, for whom they will not only bring it down, but they will always maintain it. They will see that it doesn't go up. They are exceptions, I would say. And they're very excellent patients. Their patient like that will be very happy. But the majority of people are attempting reversal so that they can eat whatever they want. Even today, just now, I got a mail from somebody from Bombay. She's writing to me and saying, is there a magic thing that I can do whereby I can go back? I will never see diabetes again. This is what they're expecting. That after that, they are now like 20 years before in their life, and now they can do whatever they want. Unfortunately, there is a natural history of type 2 diabetes. And there are non-reversible risk factors. Genetics is non-reversible. Your father and mother have both given you a gene. If, in my experience, if both your father and mother were diabetic, okay, you can apply this and see. If both your father and mother were diabetic, and you are overweight, and you're 50 years old, show me who doesn't have diabetes. I'd like to record that and publish a case series of people who don't have. The risk is 95% or more that you'll get diabetes by age 50 if both your parents are diabetic. Even if you're lean, you will still have about 70-80% risk if both your parents are diabetic. How are you going to change that? You cannot change your father and mother now. The gene you cannot change. Age is a non-modifiable risk factor. You saw that in the Aschett-Conley, despite everything, the diabetes went up. Why did it go up? They're 10 years older. How can you make yourself younger? You can put dye, you can put whatever you want. But your age is still age. Your pancreas is also aging. Everything is aging. It is non-reversible. What can you reverse? You can reverse your lifestyle. You can get into bed earlier. You can sleep well. You can eat healthier. You can do a lot of exercise. You can reduce weight. Those things you can do. They're all reversible. That reversal also is good enough. That's the only reversible thing which you can do. You cannot change your gene and you cannot change anything else. So therefore, this you have to do. Anyway, you have to do. Whether you have diabetes, don't have diabetes also. If you are not diabetic, you don't have to do all that. If you are 100 kilos in weight, you still have to do. You still have to protect your liver. Your fatty liver will go into cirrhosis. You'll die of that. Or you'll get heart attack, or you'll get something else. Just because you have diabetes, you are not protected from everything else. You don't have diabetes. So I think everybody should do what they can do. And reversal is a very good thing, but we should know its limitations and inform people that you have a very strong chance of going back. Because if you don't do that, people expect the moon and they think that some kind of a magic cure is being given to them. That's my only objection. And I entirely agree with you that it need not be only weight loss. There are people who lose weight and still have diabetes. The people who don't see, you mentioned about the very high A1C. I didn't add that in this because although I published trials, I have not done randomized clinical trials. So I didn't want to talk about it. One of the ways in which I have, reversed diabetes is by giving insulin at the time of diagnosis. People come with A1C of 15. I'm sure Bhagesh has listened to many of my talk. People who come with A1C of 15, blood sugar of 400, 500. I give them insulin for 1 month to 2 months. The sugars simply come down, and then after a month, insulin is taken away. The tablets are also taken away, and many are in remission. 1 year later, the A1C is 5.8 without any medicines, because hitting hard at that time when the beta cells are in a de-differentiated state. If you measure the C-peptide, it will be low. It's because it's turned into an alpha cell and it's waiting to be rescued. You are now rescuing it with insulin. Now it de-differentiates back into a beta cell. You measure the C-peptide, there's a big jump. From the low C-peptide, you'll see the C-peptide jumping up, almost coming up to normal. And the man's sugar completely goes away without insulin, without tablets, everything. Will that last forever? No, even that will not last forever. 2-3 years down the line, again, it will start coming back. So about 2 years, 2-3 years is an average to expect that with all this you'll get. But there are people who after that have been so careful, that 5% I mentioned, that even after 10 years, their A1C is still 6.2, 6.3. After the initial 14% that they came, they've never seen above 6.5 for 10 years. Is that common? No, it's not common. It's very, very uncommon. So therefore, will I not treat with the insulin? No, I will treat, because I want to bring them down. At least large number of them will remain there. And if you don't do that, if you just give them on metformin or something when they are 14%, it will come down to 10%. That will be their best. After that, it's never going to come down. That guy is definitely going to get complications of diabetes. So we have to hit early, hit hard, tell our people that show this natural history and say, yes, it is reversible, but you should work on it, and tell them that whatever you do, diabetes is still a progressive condition. We cannot deny the fact. It's almost being told that so long we were telling people it's a progressive condition, but it's not. No, it is a progressive condition. How can you prevent age? It's a progressive condition, which you should fight with all your might to keep it in that position. The aim of treatment is to make people live up to 100 years without complicating. To me, that is the most important thing. Reversal is good if you can get it. If you don't get reversal, also is fine. If you live up to 100 years with no complication, as many of my patients have done, why am I bothered whether they had reversal or not? So I tell them, don't get disappointed if you don't get reversal. If you get it, it's good. Or even for a few years, you get reversal also, it's good. 4-5 years, you have reversal. That good effect will continue another 4-5 years. Meanwhile, tighten up now. Don't worry if you have to go back to tablet. People think taking tablet is a sin, or taking tablet is a poison. Oh, these are all poisons. They're not poisons. We've used it for 50 years. There's no poison in them at all. Oh, it will damage the kidney. It doesn't damage the kidney. Show me the evidence where it damages the kidney. It doesn't. It doesn't damage anything. If you take it properly, judiciously, use it properly. Don't use it in the wrong sense, wrong doses, wrong people. Use it correctly. A good surgeon knows how to use the knife. If I were to do surgery, I'll kill everyone, because I'm not a surgeon at all. But a good surgeon will take a knife and like dancing he will do, and he'll finish his surgery in record time. So I think people who are trained in it, people who are experienced in it, they should attempt it. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, I think you have. In fact, I wanted to ask that main remission following and hitting hard at the initial level, that Wang's article subsequently.
It's quite dramatic when it works. But
yes.
You ask me, is it permanent? I'll be lying a bit. Nothing is permanent.
Yes. Dr. Sudhar Thanekar, you're one of the senior most diabetologists of the city. You have seen almost right from the one tablet stage to the multiple tablet stage, what we are using in current scenario. Can you throw light on this?
Yeah, I would like to talk from the point of view of how the patients think about this and talk to me about this. Unfortunately, now in the last, say, especially more than for the last 1 year or more, there is so much of this kind of a thing in the social media where all kinds of unreliable organizations, semi-medical, quasi-medical organizations are also coming up and really presenting themselves with very glossy things like we'll completely cure your diabetes and things. And they talk about, even I'm quite saddened that many times such things are even kind of acknowledged by our own professional colleagues, kind of And what happens is, the patients, they come and ask us. And most important thing is that these organizations, I don't know how they do, but they tend to put them on various kinds of restrictive diets, and they're jumping from one diet to the other. Like they may start with intermittent diet and then they go with that very low calorie diet, keto diet, this, that. I've seen even a very young, type 2 diabetic, like a 21-year-old type 2 diabetic, who, was put on something like a keto diet, and he went into severe complications. And most of our patients really want to know, and they don't even tell us that they are going to this. They stop the medicines themselves, even those who have been on medication for 10, 15 years. And then they just go into these kind of very, very restrictive diets. And they talk about the reversal of this food pyramid and all these other things. So, have you not found such situations in your practice, Dr. Mohan, where patients are caught into this kind of unscientific, media related quasi-medical organizations who are spoiling all that attempt of so many years we have kept our patients under control, and suddenly you find that they just disappear from your list, and they come after 2-3 years, and then they say they went for some reversal of diabetes with this. So how do you deal with such? I'm dealing with this. I'm finding it very difficult to. They don't even accept that, yes, there can be a re-reversal. I mean, in spite of all that education, how do you protect your patients from this?
I can't talk about protection, but I can't agree with you more. And that is precisely the reason why I got into this. And that's the reason I'm giving this talk everywhere, because I think science is science.
Yes.
And, we can't take away science. Everything has to be evidence-based, and safety of people is extremely important. One of my own consultants who had type 1 diabetes started trying this, and she was admitted in severe ketoacidosis. And she's a fairly sensible person, but somehow fell for this. And then the endocrinologists who were treating her were actually shouting at her, saying, how can you do this? You're a qualified doctor. You're working with Dr. Mohan, and it happened to you. Did you have any sense to think what she said? I made a mistake, and they were so, persuasive that I thought I will do this and so on. And I'm terribly against these keto diets and paleo diets and all these kind of diets, because they're totally unbalanced. They are nutritionally very poor. It's not only A1C and body weight that we are measuring. There are so many things that you cannot measure in the body. Okay. And you're, simply putting somebody on one size fits all, you're giving to everyone. And then you're finding that, some reversal comes and some weight loss comes, and they're very happy showing before, after pictures. What happens after that, after picture? Nobody comes to social media and says, no, I was like this and I became like this, but then I became like this. That nobody is coming and telling. They are ashamed, and therefore they won't say it. And it has gone to an extent where they are even saying diabetologists are only there to make money. Yeah. They are only writing all this because they want to write medicine, because they are paid by pharma to do that. So if we write metformin, we're paid by pharma to write metformin, not because I think metformin is good for the patient. And if you tablet, you're almost a sinner now. Oh, you've done the ultimate crime. And insulin is unthinkable. Your cancer producing, kidney damage producing insulin, you're giving to people in the 100th year of insulin. I think Banting and Best will be rolling in their grave if they heard all this now. And so I think these are things which, so I said, okay, this kind of upfront, because many people are telling me, even people started asking me, you have not, reversed my diabetes. I've come to you for so long, and 25 years I've been coming to you. You haven't reversed my diabetes. I said, no, you reversed it now. No, I have to. You could have. No, if you had tried then, you could have reversed. But you made me take medicines for 25 years. I'll almost, you're like a criminal now. For 25 years, you've been giving me insulin and tablets. What are you? You're a criminal, kind of a thing. I said, okay, now time has come for us to enter into the field. And so we said, we will try to say what is the truth, and say the truth, the science part of it. Bring that in, and there should be regulations, because ultimately, even giving food to somebody should be regulated. What is this thing that they're giving? They are interfering with lives of people. And have enough studies been done on this? Has the safety of this been established? Has the long-term sustainability of this has been established? Unfortunately, these lobbies are so strong that if I said, where a keto diet lobby was there, they'll almost kill me. for saying that, and they are all funded so heavily, and they have so much of money power, gunda power, they have everything, We are just poor doctors who are, taught something we have learned and something we are trying to help people. Our motive is different. Our motive is to help people to lead a normal life. That is what I became a doctor only for that, to help people to live a long and healthy life. That's why I became in this profession. I'm trying to do that to the best of my ability, taking all evidence that is available in the world and saying, how do I synthesize this and give it to my patient so that the quality of his or her life improves. So that is our sole aim. So I think I couldn't agree with you more. Now, how do I stop this? I don't think it's my business to try to stop them, because then I'm entering into a war zone with people with whom I don't have the wherewithal to do that, and I will lose my, my whole peace of mind trying to treat my patients. And therefore, I will continue to do what I can. I'll try to educate people as much as possible, and then leave it to them to decide what is the best for them. It's it's a democratic country, and they can choose whatever they want to do.
Yeah. It is as though we have not offered them a possible cure, and we are trying to keep them from getting cured of diabetes. That's how many patients, talk to
keep you with them. So that what I'm saying is, you go for all that. Come back. I've never told anybody who wants to try any of these things, don't do it, because it's his vision. They've already decided to do it. All I say is, you do it, but come back to me and let me see. And I've seen some of these people from Vijayawada diet, something, and the man comes back and he says, see, you put me on insulin. Now I'm off insulin. What I tell them at that time, I don't criticize them. What I say is, excellent. You've achieved it. Come back and see me in 3 months' time. 3 months' time, when he comes back, he's already on tablets all the way. I said, what happened to your magic diet? I couldn't follow that. Back. I said, I didn't want to do last time, because that would have been bad when you've already achieved the results. That's why I said, come back in 3 months' time. But that I wanted to see you. I want to see that you're healthy. If you continue for 5 years like that and you're doing well, I will learn. Maybe I'll start that diet. Why wouldn't I do that? If it's going to help my patients, why wouldn't I adopt that? That becomes new evidence. We'll adopt it.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
You're perfectly right. I think this is the phase I think everyone is going through in our profession. This is a lots of promotion happening about the weight loss, that magic wand diets. So in fact, there are lots of thing we keep telling. When they take a food in a restaurant, nobody asks, does it cause them a harm? But the moment we give a medicine which has been tried for 50 years, they ask, does this tablet has got a side effect?
No, not only does it produce, they argue with me. In social media, they're right. But I know that metformin produces cancer. I know metformin produces kidney failure. So I just write back, please send me the evidence. I'm still studying. So please send me the evidence. I would like to read that. That's it. With that, it'll come. Artificial sweetener. Artificial sweetener will produce cancer. 100% cancer. So I said, can you send me some case reports of these cancers? I would like to see which are the human cancers produced by artificial sweeteners. One, just show me one paper. Then they are so convinced about it. They have not seen a single report, but they've been reading these things. And so they are convinced. They'll argue with me also, saying, no, we are convinced. So I say, how many cases have you seen? Show me. Then they know they have nothing, no answer to give.
Yeah.
Dr. Mohan, with the permission of the moderator, one question about the rice. Rice seems to be the new villain, or maybe it's now probably, I would say, the villain in diabetes. So what is your comments?
Oh, I've done a lot of work on this, so I can tell you our own take. So first study that we did was a cross-sectional study, where we looked at the rice intake in Chennai. We divided rice intake into quartiles of carbohydrate intake. So the first quartile is about 198 grams. Take it as 200 grams. Then 250, 300, 350, 400 was the last quartile. So when you took the quartiles of rice intake in Chennai and divided the prevalence of plotted the prevalence of diabetes, it went up like that. It went up 4-fold. The odds ratio went up by 4, which means when your carbohydrate doubles intake, rice, in Chennai it was rice, from 200 grams to 400 grams, the diabetes prevalence went up 4 times. Okay. So if you had 6% prevalence in the first quartile, it's 24% in that. Now you may say it's probably due to obesity. No, you have corrected for body weight, you have corrected for BMI, socioeconomic status, you have corrected for family history of diabetes, you have corrected for physical activity. Okay. So there was a clear indication. And this was actually taught to me, to be very honest, if you're interested, I can tell you the truth. Bhagavan Baba, of whom I am a follower, in an interview, he told me, you have got the data, you have not looked at it, look at your own data. Rice is associated with diabetes, white polished rice. He told me that. So I went back and I checked and I found it was correct. He published it in British Journal of Nutrition. Now you may say there could be other confounders. In a cross-sectional study, there could be confounders. Maybe in that fourth group, there's something else other than rice, apart from all these factors, which are not corrected for, which we have acknowledged as a limitation in the study. But it's a very strong correlation. We also saw metabolic syndrome going up, weight going up, triglycerides going up, HDL going down, all that we showed, but all are cross-sectional. Then we started the prospective study. Prospective study was a prospective urban rural epidemiological study, pure. Now that we have been part of, it started in St. John's and then by Mario Vaz and Salim Youssef. We were among the first to join. Now it is finished 15 years of follow-up. We're following the same individual 15 years. This is a study based on 150,000 people in 21 countries, 5 continents. It's the largest epidemiological study in the world, period. All papers are New England Journal or Lancet, okay? Most of them, okay? So we looked at the data on rice because the diabetes part of it, the pure study is completely, I'm looking after that. So what happened is I said, now let me look at the prospective data. So I took around 2000 when the study started. Now it's 2021, 21 years of follow-up. Around 2000 we started the pure study. So we had people then who were recruited then. And from there, we followed up these people for 15, 20 years. And then they had no diabetes then. We excluded all those who had diabetes. Then we took the rice intake at that point and then saw country-wise, region-wise, even continent-wise, what is the association? Where there is no rice intake was not much in some countries, North America and so on, there's no association because they're not even fourth quartile is not eating enough rice. So there is no. But in South Asia, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, in this area, there was a very strong correlation between new onset type 2 diabetes and rice intake after correcting for everything possible under the sun. Now, this is very strong data because 15, 20 years follow-up data, new onset diabetes, incident diabetes, they had no diabetes earlier. We are following the same population for 15 years and this is published in Diabetes Care, became a very big paper. So this, we are able to show that yes, in our population, carbs, high carbs, that's why I said we take 70% carbohydrate. That's definitely one of the drivers of the epidemic. I don't know from where Dr. Paramesh took the epidemic, the statistic, but roughly what he said was correct because carbohydrate, rice, unhealthy, carbs, polished rice, and wheat. In the rest of India, it is wheat. We are from the south, so we looked at rice. But if you look at polished wheat in Punjab and other places, it's the same. The more carbohydrate you take, the more your pancreas gets drained out of its insulin and you get into diabetes faster. That has been very clearly shown. Then we did reverse thing. If you substitute that carbohydrate with say protein or with healthy fats, what happens? There is definitely an improvement, particularly protein intake. If you increase your protein intake from the very low 8% protein, if you make it say 18, 20% protein, healthy plant-based protein, which also Dr. Paramesh talked about very correctly, definitely it matters. Now, is rice the only cause? Definitely not. Physical inactivity is a very strong risk factor. If you remove rice from the equation completely, physical inactivity, total inactivity to moderate activity to high activity, diabetes comes down. Fiber intake reduces. Fruit and vegetable intake, if you increase not fruit, but vegetable intake, green leafy vegetables, there's a decrease in diabetes as your increase of that goes on. So there are multiple factors. Apart from that, body weight, of course, there's no thing at all. There's a clear correlation. Apart from that, we have shown in separate studies, depression directly connected to diabetes. Nothing to do with rice, nothing to do with things, just depression. So there are multiple factors within diabetes etiology. Rice is one, physical inactivity is another, obesity is another, stress and mental factors are another. That is why a program for prevention, for reversal, for control should include mind control, should include sleep, as was rightly mentioned, chronobiology. Of course, physical activity is extremely important. Your carbs have to come down, but not to zero. That's the point. You cut the carbs from 70% to 35, 40%, half it, enough, it will reverse. Only that excess carbs, replace it with healthy protein and healthy fats, monounsaturated fats, some polyunsaturated, but more of monounsaturated fats, and then healthy plant-based protein. Whereas animal protein, the same protein, animal protein, induces diabetes. Red meat is inducing diabetes, whereas plant-based protein is protective. So we have now understood the factors which are responsible. Now, if you put all this into a program, it becomes a very healthy program. Because now we are telling people to eat healthy, sleep on time. This is exactly what our Ayurvedic physicians are saying. Okay, we say make it holistic, make it integrated. They are doing it, we are not doing it. That's the problem. It is also true, I think partly we are to be blamed. When we see sugars not coming down, we add one more tablet. We don't go into the root cause. Whereas the systems, alternative systems of medicine, they go into the root cause. And they say, why is it? Is there something troubling you? Is there a family problem? Are you sleeping well? Have you had any tensions? Have you had anything else? They find out the root cause and fix that. And therefore, they're able to do that. Why can't we do that? Anything preventing us from doing that? Asking 2 extra questions to our patients? We should also integrate integrated medicine into our system and then increase the tablet. Because you find something keeping on tablet increasing, insulin increasing, something is wrong somewhere. It doesn't happen like that. So we have to find out each individual, treat them individually, and then we will get the results. So rice is definitely a risk factor in South Asia. Incidentally, in China, it is no longer, it was 10 years ago, there were a lot of papers showing strong correlation between rice intake and Chinese increase in diabetes. They've changed from rice. They've started switching over to more protein, more vegetables, more the whole diet, because China can enforce it. So they've enforced it. The rice intake has fallen. And that is why I said I don't believe those numbers of China suddenly increasing, doubling its diabetes numbers in 1 year. Is it possible? It's definitely not possible. Our population is going to overtake China. How can we have half the number of people in China and Pakistan, 1/3 of our population, they're showing almost catching up with India? How can it be? Indian and Pakistanis are the same, only one line is divided into 2 countries. So those figures, I don't believe those things.
Okay. Chairman, if there are no questions, can we?
Yeah, please, sir. I think we are more short the time by 6 minutes. Definitely.
Sorry, one last question. Sorry, I did not realize I was on the mute. Regarding the rice, there are many traditional rices like the Rajmudi rice, and there are many of them. I don't know the full list. Many of them have become extinct or forgotten. Is there any relation with this white polished rice, particularly the IR8, which was introduced from Philippines and Malaysia, and the traditional rices? Is there any advantage, disadvantage, anything you know of?
We might know that we had even applied for a patent on a rice. We introduced what is called as Dr. Mohan's high fiber rice. We had grown it through some people, introduced it. We found reduction in sugars. The glycemic index was much low. We had problems in maintaining it because hybrid nature of the thing, suddenly it mutates and then you don't get the quality. So we stopped that. Now we are working with Tamil Nadu Agriculture University trying to produce that. Brown rice we have worked on extensively. In fact, we do have a brown rice which we produce. When it has the husk and it has the the thing in it, it has vitamin B complex, it has more protein. So brown rice definitely is more healthy. The problem is people don't like it. The smell, the taste, the chewy nature. You have to chew more. Cooking it is difficult, and storing it is very difficult. In 3 months, it becomes rancid. So even traders don't want to keep it. So brown rice is kind of fallen off a little. Millets are good. But the problem with millets is that they're also polished. So although they are healthier, the phytonutrients are better, the glycemic index is high of the millets which are available now. If you go back to the original millet, if you go back to the original hand-pounded rice, it is good. In 1970, when the diabetes prevalence was 3% in Chennai, and when it became 24% now, that time also rice was taken, now also rice is taken. So if it is rice, that is a people who argue with me, they'll say then why was diabetes? They were not eating the polished white rice now. The rice mills came only in 1970s. There were only 28 rice mills in 1970. There are 1.5 lakh rice mills in India. That's the difference. And then, secondly, those days, the pace of life was not the same as what you're leading now. Okay, they were working to American timings and paid in dollars and then not sleeping in the night, and there was no television then. Okay, it's a completely different life. People are walking more. The villages now, they're plowing the field. The whole lifestyle has changed. With that, the rice becomes a problem. Plus, we are so that we can afford now that we're eating overeating, plus all the junk foods are coming. So it's not rice alone. Rice is bad. In this context, today we reduce it. And there are different varieties of rice. All rices are not the same. Definitely.
Sir, you did mention about cutting down the carbohydrates. Have you tried anything as a proper trial using, say, Atkins or modified Atkins diet, or even keto diet? I know you spoke about keto diet. Have you tried?
I have not personally done the trials, but generally I feel that anything is made zero. It was like a near zero carb diet. And there are others who go the other extreme, making it zero fat diet. Saying fat is thing. I believe that carbs, protein, and fats all are essential for the human body. So you must have a certain proportion of both. So putting people on something which is like a zero, but one thing I have seen with keto diet and all that is that the lipids going up. I think Parmesh had put a question in LinkedIn when I talked about that. That when Dr. Parmesh Amana had written, I think asked a question in LinkedIn. I didn't answer it in the public forum. I didn't. But when you bring your carbs down to zero or near zero, your fat will go to above 70-80%. If you're going to take an 80% fat, are you telling me it's healthy? Your LDL will hit the ceiling. I've seen it so many times. I've seen people coming in blocked artery. 1 year after trying that, suddenly he has a chest pain. He's got blocked coronary artery. So much fat you're pumping in. 70-80% fat you keep pumping in. Naturally, and what they ought to do is they don't even tell them to eat healthy fat. Eating meat, steaks. That's what Atkins promotes, no? He himself died of that. So big steak pieces, such big steak, that's what they advertise. Because in the US, they're advertising so much of eat this, very healthy, so much of steak. It produces cancer, apart from, look at the cancer trial. Correlation with the red meat is strong. And diabetes, not in India, because we don't eat that much red meat here. So I'm not able to see the correlation. But you look at the US studies, look at other studies, European studies. You find red meat and diabetes directly correlated. Not fish or chicken. That's different. Poultry is different. But red meat is directly associated with this. So Atkins diet directly promotes that, saying all meat you want. It can't be healthy. How can it be healthy?
No.
It cannot.
Sir, coming to the diet per se, ketogenic diet has been proven effective in epilepsy.
Yes,
and nowadays they're trying in many
treatment for epilepsy. Yes.
Yeah,
because
so I do
ketones are given. Yeah. That's a treatment. But now for epilepsy, I don't think you need that. You got good medicine. 50, 100 years ago, when there was no proper treatment for epilepsy.
No.
Today you don't keto diet to treat epilepsy.
No, sir. We use ketogenic diet in resistant cases. Almost 20 to 25% children do not respond to epilepsy, and it was first tried in obviously in John Hopkins. It had become out of fashion because
epilepsy it is used.
Yeah, so I do practice ketogenic diet for epileptic patients in only those 1/4 who do not respond to standard line of medication.
As a therapy, if it's being used for a particular purpose, I have no problem.
True, but diabetes was interesting because that also contains low carbohydrate. But obviously, I don't know if it can be tried in some controlled way, not as a.
There are trials. To be honest, there are trials, but some of them are impressive, but they're short term. And see, they may be okay in a place where carbs are already only 20-30%. In the US, they don't eat too much of carbs. No. But when a country has 70-75% carbs, to bring it to 0 to 10% carbs on a lifelong basis for the whole population is a big ask. It's a very big ask. So I don't know if that's culturally possible in a long term for the whole population. I'm not sure about that.
Okay, since it is a time, I think maybe Ravi Kumar, can we call it?
Okay.
Yeah, this can be never ending.
A lot of discussion is going around. We're so happy.
I must acknowledge Dr. Mohan, Dr. Vagesh, Dr. Sudha, and also Dr. Parmesh. There are two Parmeshas in the same screen. So I can say from last 1 year, we've been organizing various events, various talks every month. And this is one of the most interactive, and it's been almost an hour, and very actively participated by various, including the public, not only from Indian Institute of Science. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Dr. Mohan, for sparing your valuable time, and your passion to teach and help is quite evident. Thank you very much, Dr. Sudha. Thank you very much for being here, Dr. Vagesh, and also Dr. Parmesh for, I'm sure you're managing your jet lag and being with us. Sorry, I could not come to Indian Institute of Science on time because of an emergency. Thank you, everyone, on behalf of COMAT, Indian Institute of Science, the Ivicha Center, and utmost Dr. Parmesh for actively literally, like there's not been a 1 month where he has missed any talks or organizing the events with all eminent speakers. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.